Dust settled over Oak Haven's main street as Wyatt watched the newcomer turn away her third solid offer of the morning. In a harsh frontier where survival meant taking what you could get, her stubbornness made no sense. Stepping off the boardwalk, he tipped his hat and asked the dangerous question. Oak Haven, Colorado Territory, was a town built on the desperate hopes of silver miners and the ruthless ambition of cattle barons. It was not a place where a woman traveling alone could afford to be particular. Yet, from his vantage point beneath the shadowed awning of the Silver Spur Saloon, Wyatt O'Connor watched a woman be exactly that. Wyatt was a man shaped by the unforgiving landscape. At 32, his face was already weathered by sun and wind, his eyes a sharp, pale blue that missed very little. He was the top foreman for the Blackwood Cattle Company, a job that required him to read men and horses with equal accuracy. But the woman currently navigating the warped pine boards of the town sidewalk was a puzzle his instincts couldn't immediately solve. Her name, he had learned from the stagecoach driver who brought her into town 2 days prior, was Clara Higgins. She wore a simple, travel-stained dress of navy broadcloth, devoid of the lace and frills favored by the town's wealthier wives. Her posture was rigidly straight, her dark hair pinned back in a sensible, no-nonsense knot. She carried a leather satchel clutched tightly to her chest, guarding it as if it held gold bars rather than personal effects. Wyatt struck a match against the wooden post, cupping the small flame to light his cigarillo. Through the thin haze of smoke, he observed her first stop, Abigail Jenkins' Diner. The diner was a local staple, known for hot coffee and decent wages. The wide front window was open to let out the stifling heat of the kitchen. Wyatt watched as Abigail, a stout woman with flour permanently dusted across her apron, leaned over the counter to speak to Clara. Abigail was desperately short-handed. Her last waitress had run off with a traveling tintype photographer. Wyatt couldn't hear the exact words, but he read the body language perfectly. Abigail was gesturing expansively, clearly making an offer. $3 a week, a cot in the back room, and all the stew she could eat. It was a lifeline for a destitute stranger. Clara smiled, a tight, polite curve of her lips, and shook her head. She spoke briefly, gave a respectful nod, and walked back out onto the sun-baked street. Wyatt frowned, the cigarillo clamped between his teeth. Too proud to sling hash, he thought. Maybe she thinks she's above grease and dishwater. He watched her continue down the boardwalk until she reached the storefront of Matilda Gable's dress shop. Mrs. Gable catered to the wives of the railroad executives and cattle owners. It was quiet, clean work. Wyatt adjusted his stance, leaning his weight against the saloon wall. He waited 10 minutes. Through the glass, he saw Matilda hand Clara a piece of fine silk and a needle, likely a test of her stitching. Clara held the fabric for a moment, examining it not with the eye of an artist, but with a cold, calculating gaze. Then she placed the needle back on the counter. She shook her head again, offering another polite, unwavering refusal. 2 jobs in an hour, Wyatt mused, his curiosity sharpening into genuine intrigue. Survival in Oak Haven required pragmatism. Pride was a luxury that usually led to an unmarked grave on the edge of town. When Clara emerged from the seamstress shop, she didn't look defeated. If anything, her stride was more determined. She adjusted her grip on her leather satchel and headed toward the far end of town, where the whitewashed clapboard of the First Congregational Church stood. Adjacent to it was the schoolhouse. Wyatt casually pushed off the wall and began to walk in the same direction, keeping to the shadows of the mercantile and the assayer's office. He wasn't following her, he told himself. He was just stretching his legs. Outside the schoolhouse, Reverend Josiah Hale was sweeping the front steps. The town had been searching for a schoolmarm for 2 months. Wyatt stood by the blacksmith's forge across the street, pretending to inspect a display of horseshoes while straining to listen. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of their voices over the rhythmic clanging of the smith's hammer. "It comes with a modest stipend, Miss Higgins," the Reverend was saying, leaning on his broom. "But the community is generous. You would have your own cabin, firewood provided through the winter, and the profound respect of Oakhaven." "You are very kind, Reverend Hale." Clara's voice was surprisingly low and melodic, though laced with an unmistakable edge of steel. "And I value education highly. But I'm afraid molding young minds requires a specific sort of patience I do not currently possess. Furthermore, I require daylight hours for my own personal affairs." "Personal affairs?" the Reverend echoed, sounding slightly offended. "Miss Higgins, a single woman in this territory." "We'll manage just fine, Reverend. Good day to you." Clara turned on her heel, the hem of her navy dress kicking up a small cloud of red dust. She had just refused respectability, security, and shelter. Wyatt tossed the stub of his cigarillo into the dirt and ground it out beneath the heel of his boot. He had seen enough. He crossed the street, timing his intersection perfectly, so that he stepped onto the boardwalk just as she approached. "Excuse me, miss," Wyatt said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that stopped her in her tracks. Clara looked up. For the first time, Wyatt saw her eyes up close. They were a striking shade of amber, but they weren't soft. They were guarded, calculating, and undeniably tired. "If you are looking for direction, sir, I'm a stranger here myself," she said, her tone dismissive. She made to step around him. Wyatt shifted his weight, subtly blocking her path without being threatening. He rested his thumbs in his gun belt, a gesture of casual ease. "I know exactly where I am, Miss Higgins. I've been in Oakhaven since it was nothing but 3 tents and a mud puddle. What I don't know is what exactly you're doing." Clara bristled, her grip on her satchel tightening until her knuckles turned white. "My business is my own." "Normally, I'd agree," Wyatt replied, a slow, easy smile touching his lips. "But I just watched you turn down a hot meal and wages at Abigail's, a clean roof over your head at the seamstress, and the most respectable position this town has to offer from the Reverend. And you did it all in the span of a single morning." Clara's amber eyes narrowed. "Have you made a habit of stalking women through town, Mr. O'Connor? Wyatt O'Connor." He tipped the brim of his hat. "And I don't stalk, I observe. A man in my line of work stays alive by noticing things that don't add up. And, Miss Higgins, you don't add up." "I assure you, my arithmetic is flawless," she snapped back. "Then explain the math to me," Wyatt challenged, stepping just a fraction closer. The scent of her, lye soap, road dust, and a faint hint of lavender caught him off guard. A woman alone, looking for work, turns down 3 perfectly good jobs. So, I have to ask. He paused, letting the weight of the frontier silence stretch between them. "What kind of work do you truly want?" The question hung in the stifling midday air. Wyatt watched Clara's face carefully. Most women, most people, when confronted with direct scrutiny in Oakhaven, either deflected with humor or cowered. Clara did neither. She held his gaze, her amber eyes searching his weathered face as if weighing his worth. "Mr. O'Connor, is it?" she finally said, her voice dropping to a quieter, more dangerous register. "What makes you think I want any work at all?" "Because your boots are resoled with cheap leather, The cuffs of your dress are expertly mended to hide the fraying, and you guard that satchel like it's your last possession on earth," Wyatt said bluntly, though his tone was devoid of malice. "You're not here on a pleasure tour. You need coin, but you need something else more." A flash of genuine surprise broke through Clara's stoic facade, quickly masked by a defensive glare. "You are terribly observant for a— what is it you do exactly? A hired gun?" She glanced pointedly at the Colt strapped to his thigh. "I'm the foreman for the Blackwood Cattle Company," Wyatt corrected. "I manage men, livestock, and whatever problems arise on 50,000 acres of grassland. Which means I know desperate when I see it. And I know a hidden agenda when it's staring me in the face." Clara looked up and down the street. The boardwalk was mostly empty, the town's residents taking shelter from the punishing afternoon sun. She stepped closer to Wyatt, into the sliver of shade provided by the assayer's awning. "Since you are so perceptive, Mr. O'Connor, I will be blunt," Clara said. "I do not want to serve pie. I do not want to hem dresses. And I certainly do not want to teach rowdy children how to spell. I require a position that gives me access." "Access to what?" "Paperwork," Clara replied, her voice tightening. "Ledgers, land deeds, financial records. I'm looking for a job as a bookkeeper, a clerk, or an archivist, and I need to work for someone deeply entrenched in the financial architecture of this county." Wyatt let out a low whistle, pushing his hat back on his head. "Well, aren't you a walking contradiction? A woman demanding a clerk's job in a territory where most men think reading is a luxury." "I am highly educated, Mr. O'Connor. My father was an accountant in St. Louis. I can balance a ledger faster and more accurately than any whiskey-soaked clerk in this dust bowl, but men out here don't hire women to handle their money." "No, they don't," Wyatt agreed softly. A sudden realization began to click into place. He looked at her satchel. "You're not just looking for a wage. You're hunting for something specific, a record, a deed." Clara's silence was confirmation enough. Her jaw set stubbornly. "Can you point me toward a business that handles high-volume transactions and needs a clerk, or are we finished here?" Wyatt looked out at the dusty street, his mind racing. He was a practical man, a man who survived by keeping his head down and doing his job for one of the most ruthless men in Colorado. He should tip his hat, walk away, and let Clara Higgins fail on her own. It was the smart thing to do, but as he looked back down at her, at the fierce intelligence burning in her eyes and the desperate courage it took to stand her ground, he felt an unfamiliar tug in his chest. It was a dangerous, thrilling sensation. "The assayer's office doesn't have the volume you want," Wyatt said slowly, his voice dropping. "The mercantile's books are a mess, but they wouldn't give you access to the county's real money. There's only one place in Oak Haven that holds the kind of records I think you're looking for." Clara's breath hitched slightly. "Where?" "The Blackwood Cattle Company." Wyatt met her gaze squarely. "My boss, Jeremiah Cobb." Clara's eyes widened slightly, though she quickly suppressed the reaction. "Jeremiah Cobb," she repeated. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. Wyatt caught the subtle shift in her demeanor. "You know the name?" "I know of him. He owns half the county." "He owns more than half," Wyatt corrected grimly. "And as it happens, his last clerk, a nervous little man named Phineas, took a stagecoach out of town 3 nights ago in the dead of night. Cobb has been raging all week because his supply manifests and payroll are a disaster. He needs a numbers person, desperately." Clara's grip on her satchel loosened just a fraction. "Would he hire a woman?" Jeremiah Cobb wouldn't hire an angel from heaven if he thought it would cost him an extra dime, Wyatt said. He's a hard, miserable bastard who hates women almost as much as he hates losing money. But if you can prove you can sort out his mess, and if I vouch for you—" Wyatt trailed off, realizing the massive risk he was considering. "Why would you vouch for me?" Clara asked, stepping closer. The distance between them was practically non-existent now. "You don't know me. You know I have a hidden motive. If I cross your boss, he'll likely take it out on you." "He definitely will," Wyatt murmured. He looked down into her amber eyes, feeling the magnetic pull of her defiance. "Maybe I'm tired of watching Cobb grind this town into dust. Or maybe I just want to see if you're as good at arithmetic as you claim." Clara studied him. For the first time, the defensive wall around her seemed to crack, revealing a sliver of genuine vulnerability. "If you can get me into that office, Mr. O'Connor, I will be in your debt. I don't collect debts from women, Miss Higgins, but I do expect honesty between partners." Wyatt held out his calloused hand. "If I take you into the lion's den, you have to promise me you won't do anything to get yourself killed. Cobb is a dangerous man." Clara looked at his extended hand. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. Jeremiah Cobb, the man whose forged signatures and phantom companies had systematically stolen her late father's land claims in the valley, driving him to an early grave. She had traveled hundreds of miles to find the proof hidden in his ledgers to bring to the federal marshals. She reached out and placed her hand in Wyatt's. His grip was warm, rough, and surprisingly gentle. "I promise I will not get myself killed, Mr. O'Connor," Clara said. "Wyatt," he corrected, his thumb brushing lightly against the back of her hand before letting go. "Come on, Clara. Let's go meet the devil." They walked side by side toward the opulent two-story brick building at the end of town that served as the headquarters for the Blackwood Cattle Company. As they walked, Wyatt felt the heavy weight of impending trouble. He was inviting a fox into the hen house, fully aware that Clara Higgins was going to tear Jeremiah Cobb's empire apart from the inside. What Wyatt didn't know yet was how far he was willing to go to help her do it, or how deeply he was about to fall for the woman who held the match to burn his whole world down. The Blackwood Cattle Company headquarters smelled of stale bourbon, expensive cigar smoke, and leather. It was a stark contrast to the dusty desperation of the streets outside. Jeremiah Cobb sat behind a massive oak desk, a mountain of a man with a ruddy complexion and eyes like two black stones sunk into dough. When Wyatt ushered Clara into the room, Cobb barely looked up from the disorganized pile of supply manifests scattered before him. "I told you to find me a clerk, O'Connor," Cobb rumbled, his voice scraping like a shovel on gravel. "Not a seamstress. Get her out of here. The men need paying by Friday, and this idiot Phineas left the accounts in Chinese." "She's not a seamstress, Cobb," Wyatt said smoothly, stepping fully into the room and anchoring himself near the door. "Her name is Miss Higgins. She's an accountant from St. Louis. I watched her turn down 3 respectable jobs this morning because she wants to work with numbers. I figure you're desperate enough to let her try." Cobb finally raised his heavy head, his gaze sweeping over Clara with unapologetic disdain. "A woman, managing the Blackwood accounts? The Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad men would laugh me out of the territory." Clara didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her posture rigid, and picked up the topmost sheet of paper from Cobb's desk. It was a payroll manifest for the Northern Line Riders. "Put that down, girl," Cobb growled. "You're overpaying your freight drivers by 12%, Mr. Cobb," Clara said, her voice cutting through the thick, smoky air like a finely honed blade. She didn't look at the paper for more than 10 seconds. You are calculating their daily rate based on a 31-day month, but you're paying them weekly. You're compounding their wages improperly. If this sheet is indicative of your entire operation, you're bleeding approximately $400 a month on clerical errors alone. The silence in the room was absolute. Wyatt leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms to hide his smirk. Cobb's thick fingers paused over his glass of bourbon. He snatched the paper from Clara's hand, his eyes darting frantically over the numbers. "Show me," he demanded. Clara leaned over the desk, pointing a gloved finger at the columns. Within 5 minutes, she had not only corrected the freight driver's wages, but also found a discrepancy in the grain feed orders from the mercantile. Cobb leaned back, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead. He looked at Clara, his eyes narrowing with a predator's calculation. "I'll pay you $12 a month, half of what I paid Phineas." 25, Clara countered immediately, "and a private desk where I'm not to be disturbed by your ranch hands." Cobb bared his teeth in what might have been a smile. "Fine, but if the books aren't balanced by Friday, I'm throwing you out into the dirt, Miss Higgins." And just like that, the fox was in the henhouse. Over the next 3 weeks, Clara became a fixture in the dim, mahogany-paneled back office of the Blackwood building. She worked relentlessly, often staying long after the sun had dipped below the jagged peaks of the Rockies. She sorted through years of disorganized receipts, land deeds, and scribbled notes. Wyatt became her shadow. He found reasons to linger at headquarters after his shifts out on the range. He would bring her hot coffee from Abigail's diner in the quiet hours of the evening, sitting in the leather chair across from her desk while she worked. The silence between them, initially built on mutual suspicion, slowly transformed into something companionable, and then dangerously intimate. "You're going to burn your eyes out, Clara," Wyatt said one evening, watching the lamplight flicker against the golden hues of her eyes. "The numbers don't sleep, Wyatt," she murmured, not looking up from a massive, leather-bound ledger. She had long ago dropped the Mr. O'Connor. "Neither do you," he observed softly. He stood up, walking around the desk. He was close enough to smell the lavender soap she used beneath the scent of old paper and ink. "What are you really looking for?" Clara finally stopped writing. The pen trembled slightly in her hand. She looked up at Wyatt. The trust she saw in his weathered face broke her resolve. "My father was William Higgins," she whispered. Wyatt's brow furrowed. The name was familiar. The homesteader. He owned the prime water rights in the Silver Creek Valley about 5 years ago. "Until Jeremiah Cobb produced a signed deed proving my father sold the land to him to cover gambling debts," Clara said, her voice shaking with repressed fury. "My father abhorred gambling. He never signed that deed. Cobb forged it, stole our land, and drove my father into a pauper's grave in St. Louis. I'm here to find the original forged draft and the records of the men he paid off." Wyatt exhaled a long breath, staring at the ceiling. "Clara, you're playing a deadly game. Cobb doesn't just forge deeds, he buries the people who ask questions." "I have nothing left to lose," she said fiercely, looking back at the ledger. "I do," Wyatt replied, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Clara froze. She looked up, her amber eyes wide. Wyatt reached down, his calloused thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. The touch was electric, sending a jolt through both of them. In a town built on ruthlessness, this quiet, tender connection felt like the most dangerous rebellion of all. Before Clara could speak, The heavy thud of boots sounded in the hallway. Wyatt instantly stepped back, his hand dropping instinctively to the pearl handle of his Colt. It was Hiram, Cobb's chief enforcer, a man with a scarred lip and a reputation for cruelty. He peered into the office, his eyes darting suspiciously between Wyatt and Clara. "Boss wants the monthly summaries by morning, little lady," Hiram sneered. "And O'Connor, Cobb says a dozen strays were spotted near the ridge. Ride out and handle it." "It's pitch black, Hiram," Wyatt said coldly. "Cobb's orders." Hiram smiled, a nasty, knowing expression. "Unless you're too busy playing nursemaid to the clerk." Wyatt's jaw tightened. He looked at Clara, silently communicating a warning. "Be careful." He nodded once, turned, and strode out into the night. Alone in the office, Clara felt a chill settle over her. She waited until she heard the distant jingle of Wyatt's spurs fading away. Then, she pulled a hidden drawer open at the base of the desk. She had finally found it, Cobb's private secondary ledger. As she cracked the spine, her heart hammered. The proof of her father's forged deed was there, but that was just a drop in the ocean. The real drama lay in the massive fraud Cobb was perpetrating. He was systematically overcharging the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad by thousands of dollars for beef shipments, and using the surplus to bribe federal land agents, specifically a man named Josiah Grinnell, to seize properties across the territory. It wasn't just local theft, it was a federal conspiracy. Clara began frantically copying the names, dates, and amounts onto a clean sheet of paper. If she could get this to U.S. Marshal David Cook in Denver, Cobb would hang. She was so absorbed in the damning figures that she didn't hear the floorboards creak outside her door. She didn't realize she was caught until the cold, heavy barrel of a Winchester rifle was pressed firmly against the back of her head. "Well, well," Cobb's gravelly voice echoed in the small room. "I always knew you were too smart for your own good, Miss Higgins. Or should I say, William's little girl." The heavy oak door slammed shut, the iron lock clicking ominously. Jeremiah Cobb sneered, his thick fingers resting casually on the butt of his pistol. From the shadowed corner of the office, his enforcer, Hiram, stepped forward with a nasty grin. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize William Higgins' daughter?" Cobb snarled, snatching the black ledger from Clara's desk. "Your father bled for that land, and now you're going to disappear just like he did." Clara backed against the mahogany-paneled wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. "U.S. Marshal David Cook in Denver already has my copies," she bluffed, forcing her voice to remain steady. Cobb laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Hiram intercepts all the mail, girl. Tie her up. We're taking her up to the Silver Creek Ridge." Hiram lunged, but before his calloused hands could grip her shoulder, the office window shattered inward. Glass rained across the floor as Wyatt vaulted through the frame, his Colt drawn and leveled directly at Cobb's chest. He hadn't ridden out to the ridge. His instincts had told him to double back. "Step away from her." Wyatt's voice was a low, lethal rumble. Hiram foolishly went for his Winchester rifle. Wyatt fired. The deafening crack echoed through the building as Hiram collapsed, groaning and clutching a shattered shoulder. Cobb froze instantly, his hands shooting into the air as the ledger slipped from his grasp. "Grab it, Clara," Wyatt ordered, his pale blue eyes locked on the trembling cattle baron. Clara snatched the black book. They sprinted out into the cool night air toward Wyatt's waiting gelding. He hoisted her into the saddle, swinging up behind her. "To Denver," Wyatt said, spurring the horse into the moonless night. 3 grueling days later, they dropped the damning evidence onto Marshal Cook's desk. Within a week, federal deputies swarmed Oak Haven, dragging Cobb out in irons and finally returning the Silver Creek Valley to its rightful heir. The dust no longer settled on Clara's shoulders as a burden, but as a testament to the land they now owned together. Wyatt traded his gun belt for a plow, and their cattle grazed on the very valleys her father once dreamed of holding. In the end, the only ledger that truly mattered was the one they wrote side by side, balancing hardships with a fierce, unyielding, and endless love,